As a gamer, I can recall the early 2000s. It was a time when movies, music, TVs, and video games, they were all to blame for the violence in kids and teens. Postal was a small hit in the late 90s, and it attracted a great deal of controversy for not only its content, but its context. Postal marked one of the first times you were tasked with killing non-enemy characters, i.e. normal people. This was done because it was so absurd that it was downright hilarious. Those with a certain sense of humor saw it as so outrageous that they couldn't help but find it amusing. It was the reaction to that game that inspired Postal 2's complete lack of fucks given. This is a twisted and depraved game, though once you understand the reason and recover from the shock that there is a game this insane, you'll not only laugh your ass off, but you're gonna applaud the creators for making such a ballsy experience. Take away the unique context for Postal 2, and what you're left with is a sandbox shooter very much in style with Quake, Soldier of Fortune, and Kingpin Life of Crime. Postal 2 is closest to Kingpin in its design. Kingpin was a violent first-person shooter set in a somewhat open world. You had various objectives to complete, and it was quite ahead of its time due to being more than just a maze to blast through. Postal 2 plays very much like Quake and Soldier of Fortune during combat, and it takes many cues from Soldier of Fortune's level of violence, a game that was known for its brutal limb damage system. Postal 2 came along after controversy surrounding not only the first Postal, but those other games as well. This is an important factor in the design for Postal 2. In the game, you play as the postal dude and you're tasked with completing relatively mundane real-world objectives. Pick up your paycheck, cash it, get milk, that sort of thing. And this is where the game's brilliant satire comes into play. And for it to truly be effective, you must understand the time in which the game was made. This was a time when everyone feared violent games and media would lead to mass shooters and great acts of terrorism. This fear is now seen to be absurd, but it was very real during the days of Postal and even after Postal 2. Just look at the controversy surrounding the Grand Theft Auto series. In one of the first missions, your objective is to pick up your paycheck from running with scissors, the real-world developers of the game you're playing. Before you even get to your boss's office, you pass protesters that are chanting, "Games are bad, they make you mad. Games are bad, they make you mad. Games are bad, they make you mad." It's kinda catchy, actually. The funny part is that couldn't be further from the truth. But then just as you get to pick up your check, the lead developer and head of Running with Scissors fires your ass. Then, all hell breaks loose and protesters storm the building, guns blazing. Yes, one of the first missions has you fighting off pissed off video game protesters. Let that sink in for a moment. Think of how meta our humor is today. This shit was unheard of in its time. While you can kill anyone you wish, or even go through the game without killing anyone, it is very important to note the enemies you're going to face. Police, the Taliban, video game protesters, book protesters, rednecks, the army, SWAT, skinheads, and postal carriers. Even if you do not harm anyone, certain factions will attack you on sight no matter what. And once you complete certain objectives, enemies are going to swarm and attack you. This is no different than most shooters. The brilliance is in the setting and the enemies. You're in malls, post offices, game studios, libraries, pretty much any normal place you can think of. Do you remember what so many uptight congressmen labeled video games back in the day? Murder simulators. Now, if you played the recent VR game Blood Trails, that actually does kind of look like a murder simulator, and it kind of looks like Postal in VR. just nowhere near as funny, which is kind of the problem. See, when you play this game, you realize that Postal 2 made a satire and an entire game out of the idea of a murder simulator. You're never tasked with murdering anyone, though you can do so in more inventive ways than in most games allow or even think of. Mass murder, though, is not what makes the game so interesting, nor is it why it has one of the largest cult followings in the entire game industry. Out of all first-person shooters, this one has a sense of humor. Granted, it's a sick, demented, fucked up sense of humor, but there's also a great deal of brilliance in its immaturity. For one thing, no matter if you kill anyone, all hell is gonna break loose towards the end of the game. The town will be patrolled by the police, SWAT, the army, all due to the increasingly violent populace. And in the end, the Postal dude is worse off for the adventure. Without spoiling the entire ending, things just don't go well for the dude. Not even in its following expansion, Apocalypse Weekend, which sees the town blown up in a nuclear blast. So the game clearly is stating violence, well, that begets more violence. And it uses the expected trope of escalation, which we expect in all our games. Most shooters reward violence with a positive conclusion to the story. Yet this is one game that seems to indicate that all the violence you or others committed during the game has major consequences. If you broke it all down to structure and tropes, Postal 2's only notable difference from other first-person shooters was its open world and multiple approaches to its mission design. You can tell the creators think the notion that a game could inspire real-world violence is bonkers. It almost feels like it was pulled from an episode of South Park about violent games. Something so absurd it could not possibly be real. Yet it is, and I have to say, it ranks among my most favorite video games of all time! Of all time, my friends, all time. I seriously fucking love this game. I know that you may look at me differently for having said that, but I love it because it's like playing a spoof of the first-person shooter genre. Everything your mom told me was bad about games is in this dirty little bugger, and that's the exact point. It's not done to encourage these things in real life. It's not done to be a source of horror and anger. It's done for the laughs, and possibly even to make a point. The one thing that all fans of this game have in common is just how funny we think it is. No one really goes on and on about the brutal violence like they be so hardcore, yo. No, they talk about it like last night's episode of South Park. The reason I think so few mention that it really is a straight up satire of shooters and violent games as a whole is that it's so obvious if you play the game as opposed to just being shocked at the content. Is it a game everyone should play? No! But then again, everyone does not like Borat, Team America, South Park, Family Guy, or Trauma films. But they all have devoted fan bases. If you only remember Postal 2 for the controversy, you're probably unaware that this game got updated and expanded over a decade after launch because of loyal fans. The same kind of loyal fans that brought back Family Guy after being canceled. If you treat this game as something serious, of course it looks sick as all hell. You'll either love the humor though. As a gamer, you might even appreciate what the game is lampooning. Or you're gonna be so offended you'll label all those who love the game as sick, twisted little monkeys.